So here we go. Hey, everyone. We're going to kick this off officially. Thank you. Big welcome to everyone who's joining us or who's trickling in. Super pumped that you joined us today. As I sort of joked before, we're going to have an awesome conversation in public. And we're going to be digging in and talking about a topic that I think is really interesting, obviously just geeking out, but also I think really important when we think about the state of the union, the state of the world, and how we as folks within the venture ecosystem play within that. And so we're going to talk about the early stage startup ecosystem, the state of the world, and maybe where things are going and where things should go and how things should change. So it's a big topic, but we have the perfect set of panelists, folks to talk to kind of dig into that state of the union. And Heather, Danika, Charlie, thank you so much for joining us. I'll give you a proper bio in just 30 seconds. Tiny bit about me, guys. I'm Andrew Hutton. I'm formerly of Human Ventures, but recently a new company called Day One. It's a startup that I'm launching, which is a community-powered platform for supporting the earliest stage builders. My quick shameless plug is that our first fellowship is going live in a few months, rather at the end of September, and the applications are open. So if that's interesting, go on in. I'm going to pass the mic over to my co-host, Mike Saloio, and he's going to just give his intro and kind of push us along.
Thanks. So yeah, hey everybody, I'm Mike Saloio. I'm a founder at the new company, and we're a startup launchpad. We started a couple of new things during COVID. One is a club for builders on Slack called Huddle, and the other one is a demo day called BYOB. And that's me, at least career-wise. So we're going to be having three friends join the conversation who you clearly all see. And so without further ado, why don't we meet our panel?
Yeah, let me jump in and share. So let me tell you about Charlie O'Donnell here, someone who needs no introduction, but Charlie's the sole partner and founder of Brooklyn Bridge Ventures. His fund makes seed and pre-seed investments, and they're the first venture firm located in Brooklyn, which I think is really, really cool, where Charlie was born and raised. Brooklyn Bridge was in the first rounds of The Wing, Canary, Hungry Root, Ample Hills, Clubhouse, I think the New York one, not the new one over in San Francisco, Imagine, GoTen.
The one that makes money.
The one that makes money, the SaaS company.
The one that'll last.
And then, honestly, Charlie's bio is really worth reading on their website, but I skipped over a lot to then say, Charlie bikes to work, which I, give kudos to everyone who does that.
Now I bike around the block.
He's done 4 Ironmans, Ironman 70.3s, which I think are the big ones, 4 marathons, and he founded the kayaking program in Brooklyn Bridge Park. And the longest he's consecutively been outside of the 5 boroughs is 3 weeks. So love having you here, Charlie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Although anybody who didn't leave has now been in the 5 boroughs consecutively.
That's so true. That's so true.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. All right. So next introduction is Danika Laszuk. Did I pronounce your name correctly, by the way?
Laszuk.
Laszuk. Okay, cool. I've known you for years and have never asked you that question.
Not an easy one. Okay.
So Danika is currently general manager at Betaworks, in charge of CAMP, which is Betaworks' thematic accelerator. For those unfamiliar, Betaworks has built companies like Giphy and BitLink, and they've also invested in a host of consumer internet companies ranging from Tumblr and Kickstarter to Gimlet and Anchor. Prior to Betaworks, Danika was the CMO at Jawbone, and prior to that, she spent 9 years at Apple doing everything from marketing. And I just learned this today because I was looking at your LinkedIn. You're a product manager for the iPod.
I was the first one.
Amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is really cool. Okay, so I'll round us out. This gives me a ton of pleasure to introduce Heather Hartnett, who is the general partner, CEO, and my former boss at Human Ventures. She's been recognized for creating one of New York's premier startup studios and a unique approach for fresh perspectives that she brings to early stage investing and spotting talents, a huge thing. So since launching under Heather, Human Ventures has invested and built more than 30 companies with key investments including Reserve, The Skim, Current, Tiny Organics, Clark, and some of my favorite companies. Those are a really great portfolio. So welcome, Heather. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So here, let's just get into it. Oh, one final point of order. This was on my run of show. If you guys have a proper question for the panel, use the Q&A feature. It's a nice little bit of software. It helps us track questions and we can move them through a little queue. Please do so. Otherwise, keep riffing, jamming in the chat. So guys, I want to just kick it us off with a bit of a kind of high level kind of entree into sort of our topic, right? The early stages of building are the windiest, craziest, hardest, and therefore the earliest stages of investing are a category unlike any others, right? So I'd love to just like get a lay of the kind of set a foundation. You know, obviously COVID's moved things into crazy directions, but even taking a slightly wider lens, what have you seen? What would you say have been the biggest shifts in early stage investing, both on this sort of 3-month timescale, as well as sort of on the last few years timescale? Like, as you guys have been sort of in the thick of it, what have you seen has been the biggest shifts in early stage investing? Are people building different things than they were 3 years ago? Are they looking for different sorts of supports? Are their rounds changing? I don't know. What do you guys key on as the biggest shift, the biggest change in the last few years, and then maybe a few months? I kind of leave that out there for y'all.
Who wants to kick it off?
Heather, you do.
And Heather,
That's
because
right.
right now we're at 56 people, so you're
I-
like the smartest.
Nice. So first of all, I just want to say, Charlie, you were one of the first investors in New York that really took meetings with me with Human. I really respected the fact that you went early and have modeled a lot of what we've done under, on the pathway that you created. And Danika, Betaworks has been absolutely the pioneering studio. And, in a time when I just started Human, there might've been Betaworks and maybe one other studio, and now there are 10,000. So it's so awesome to be on this panel with all of you. I think the biggest thing that I've seen accelerated by COVID, but really has been happening for the last 5 years, is just the proliferation of early stage. It's like the bar keeps on rising for what gets funded by quote unquote seed funds. And in doing so, it opens up this entire new category, which is who's willing to go early and who's willing to take like really a bet on people, because that's what you're doing in the early days. And so, we say at Human all the time, it's easier than ever to start a company. It's harder than ever to win. So I'm just excited for these types of platforms that are popping up to really support founders in the earliest days and start to differentiate and have founders be able to say, what is your angle? What's your edge? Because you're really selling yourself in the early stages more than anything.
Yeah, I would say too, I think the startup, I think there's a lot of things about this time period that has made a lot of inequity worse, right? Like, those of us who lost their job, are in really bad shape potentially right now. Those of us that kept working have had their, and have stayed healthy. I'm saving more monthly because I have no entertainment expense, my food bill's gone in half. And from a security perspective, like, people say, well, how are you doing? It's like, well, I'm doing pretty well. And so, we're in a period where there's sort of two separate experiences of this time period. And I think to some extent, venture was like that earlier for many reasons. And I think probably has gotten worse in this time period, in the sense that, yeah, like there is this sort of insider game where, the bar is different depending on how close to the kind of venture inner circle you are, right? If you are in the same MBA class as the right VCs, they're probably going to take a chance on you more so than others. And frankly, like, look, that's the way that most people operate in their day-to-day life, right? You trust your kids more with your neighbor who in a pinch than somebody who's just, a stranger off the marketplace kind of thing. Now we're in an environment where, like, there's no in-person events to wander into, right? I mean, yeah, like people can go to stuff like this, but it isn't the same as showing up to a fundraising event at Betaworks, or places where somebody could just come up to you and in person just really capture your attention and be captivating, and you walk away and be like, wow, somebody just put this thing in the back of my head and they seem smart and compelling, like I want to follow up with that founder. I think it's definitively harder now than it was before. And so, and I'm seeing a lot of instances where people who actually successfully raise are hearing from a lot of other VCs. Like I had a top tier VC do a pretty large seed round for one of my companies. And immediately another VC came in, and I'm almost certain they're going to ask to throw another $1 million into it, because they feel like they have an itchy trigger finger, and they would much more likely rather put into that than take a chance on something new. So it is even more of like a have and have nots kind of environment, I think.
Wow.
So I think things that would get funded are now getting funded even more, and things that
underfunded and overfunded.
yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up to that quickly?
Sure.
You said that I thought that, well, this is for everybody, but I thought what you said about standing out at the conference was really interesting. Have you seen any founders do anything digitally to stand out during this time period?
Not a ton. I'm actually somewhat surprised at how little founders do things that would gather interested investors. And so what I mean by that is like, just the other day I was talking to a founder who was doing some infrastructure related thing. And I was like, why don't you host a half-day virtual infrastructure investor conference? Because look, your ability to run a conference is now on par with everybody else's ability to run a conference, because we can, it doesn't depend on putting a down payment on a venue, right? We're all just in this little box and Brady Bunch squares and all of this sort of stuff, right? And so like now is the opportunity to gather potential investors, because we have more time than we have meetings at this point in time. And so I'm surprised that there aren't more founders like inviting investors to chat for other reasons other than just pitching, in terms of being able to build relationships. I have one founder that's doing a healthcare related thing, and for the last couple of weeks, she's been looking for investors who tweet particular things about their own sort of personal health and wellness, and like DMing everybody. And her conversion rate to getting VCs to try out her app is like off the charts, because they're just trying all the things and trying to figure out how much quarantine has like messed with their own healthcare situation and all that sort of stuff.
Very cool.
I'll drop, I agree with all of that. And so I'll tell you one of the things that, really changed at Betaworks a couple of years ago, and I will say has accelerated in the last few years, is especially when we're looking at, being the first check, especially through the camp program, where we do an open call, because I'm trying to find the people. I'm very hard trying to find the people that aren't already funded from the dudes that they went to school with. But so one of the things that's really accelerated, I would say, in the last 6 or 12 months is when we look at the people, understanding up front sort of what is their ethical stance and how are they approaching, especially because everything is, an AI company right now. So how are you thinking about transparency and responsibility with your algorithms? How are you thinking about transparency and responsibility with your hiring, reaching customers? How can you as a startup exist in the world of Facebook and Twitter and Google, but exist outside of that world and do things differently? So I think that's an area that we may not have been as focused on in terms of our diligence a year ago, but has come very much into the forefront now. It feels sort of irresponsible to not have those conversations up front, particularly for products that are going to be using a lot of data to build on top of.
I mean, I'm super interested. Have you guys, to like build on that thread, are there new things that are being built now that weren't being built 3 years ago or 3 months ago? Like, I feel like everyone probably assumes there are, and there was obviously this awesome wave of response to COVID. People just like getting out of their day jobs, putting supply chains together, doing really cool stuff. When it comes to actual businesses, are you seeing new things just like bubbling up? Has that happened yet? Or, you know, even over a longer time scale, what were those shifts? What were the sort of more like top of mind things that people are building?
Yeah, you know that. I mean, you know this. We just launched our next cohort for founders called Humans in the Wild, and it's around future of work. And we say the human side of future of work. So we're seeing now a bunch of founders, and I'm sure in the audience, people who are building, you know, what does remote work look like? That's like the tip of the iceberg. It's really more importantly, what are the levers that now are going to be pulled, because this is the first time democratization of education could happen. It's the first time people are looking at their Ivy League education or not Ivy, but what am I paying for? And Google just launched their free education platform. And can you get certificate courses during this time? Do you take a gap year? Do you start building? So I'm excited about is seeing whether or not this is when people start to say, maybe I do start to bootstrap some businesses. Maybe I do start to see what opportunities are out there. And that to me, you know, that experience is so much more important than some of the social cues. And so, you know, I think future of work is going to depend and be much more intertwined with education and what that looks like. And then also just your skills and assessing careers. I think there's going to be a big shift, and people who might have been thinking about shifting their career at this point in time might do it. And so what are the tools and platforms to help coach you through that process? I'm excited about those types of businesses too.
Danika, you guys have run, the way you guys run camps, it's very thematic. How did you guys pick your specific themes? Are they just like the coolest, most interesting thing to you guys at the moment? Or do you sort of say, hey, this is at like the right time for this camp? What was that the selection like?
Yeah, some of both, right? So, I mean, what typically happens is we'll make a couple of seed investments in companies that we start to draw a line between them or among them and say, there's an underlying technology that's really similar, or they're attacking similar problems, maybe from a different angle. We want to learn more about this. And then, you know, we it's not just sort of, we think it's cool, but are we seeing other companies in this space or other investors looking at this space? You know, is this a space that we think there's enough energy around that we could do an open call for applications and see hundreds of companies and find a few that we can invite in and, you know, really kind of both build an ecosystem and learn about the problems in that space more deeply over the course of a camp, which is like a 3-month program.
What was your most recent camp? Just so we all know where the last energy was. We
have applications open right now for Beta Lab, which is fittingly called Fix the Internet. So our most current camp is we want to invest in companies that are bringing transparency and ethics to AI, using privacy as a feature, consumer products that are privacy first, new business models that are not data and attention harvesting, things that are combating disinformation, hate speech, some of the other ills of, you know, the big platforms. So big, broad umbrella that we're working on right now. But most recently, before this one, we just did Audio Camp, which was Future of Audio. Betaworks loves audio products and has spent a lot
that
of
feels
time.
prescient. Like just like knowing Clubhouse #2 blowing up and like all the literally copycats. It felt like audio, but you guys are there before.
Love audio. We love audio. And that one, you know, as a different sort of case study, how do we come up with that? I mean, we're already interested in audio, but we started to notice, you know, sometime last year that we were all leaving our AirPods in all the time and ordering coffee with your AirPods in and walking into work with your AirPods in and having a conversation with your AirPods in. And so this idea that there may be a new user interface emerging, audio user interface, and therefore what are the tools, what are the products, what are the new paradigms that, you know, we could look at that were audio first.
I'm not gonna have the, yeah, jump in, Mike. I was gonna say, I don't have the cleanest segue. Mike might have a better one.
Maybe it's the same one. I actually, yeah. So last time Danika and I were on the phone preparing for this, she said New York City is a vibe. And New York City is still a vibe, which I personally love for numerous reasons, including that sounds like something that would come out of my mouth. But I am curious for all of you, how has this time period been impacting the way that you're thinking about building your businesses, if any? And then specifically, I saw Betaworks, announced circles and a couple other things. So I was hoping that maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So a couple things, at least for the camp program, which we've always gotten pretty broad reach. We try to find founders wherever they are, but we do insist they come to New York for at least some of the 3 months. I don't have to do that anymore, which actually opens up a lot of opportunity for founders that for any number of reasons don't want to, can't afford to, aren't interested in, family situation doesn't accommodate it, coming to New York for a period of time. And so that's kind of exciting. I think that's, even though I still think New York's a vibe, it means that we can work harder and look further afield and consider differently the kinds of companies and the kinds of founders that we can back. And then on, for some of the other Betaworks businesses, particularly studios, just thinking about what was a business that was so much based on face-to-face contact. What does it look like now? And even in a year from now, when things hopefully feel a little bit more normal, I don't know that, we believe that there's ever a complete going back. So how do we make more virtual happenings feel more, that you can still figure out how to get those connections in those spaces? And I think that Zoom's fun, but there's got to be some better tech platforms emerging that give us some of that, feeling of contact and sort of happenstance that you're pouring yourself a cup of coffee and talk to somebody, and then you can follow up with them later and meet them that way. So I think, the studios business is really thinking about how to enable connectivity, networking, genuine conversations in a virtual way.
Charlie, Heather, I know where you're going, Heather, because I know I'm actually super curious about the humans in the wild and like your plans. But I have a thought or a question for you, Charlie, very related, right? Related to, like, you've always been a New York, well, you tell me actually, have you always been a New York City focused investor? And how do you see that changing now that we're all sort of living in this, like you said, this, the Zoom screen and the, just like intermediated by the screen? How do you think about like an investing thesis that's not about necessarily getting people together, but are you going to go across the country and like how does investing change versus like a program?
Yeah, I mean, I have not changed my thesis based on this time period. I know it feels like 4 years, but it's been 4.5 months. And frankly, if you think about the average life of a company from, seed or pre-seed to acquisition, it's actually a very small time period. And so I am hopeful and optimistic that 2021 will look very different than 2020. So I'm not about to add on a bunch of portfolio companies that in which the founders are all over the place and that don't benefit from the critical mass of what's going on in New York, whatever, which I think I still think getting together will be important, and I actually think that people are overestimating how much of a shift, because I think for the most part, most companies were like basically almost 100% in person, show up in the office kind of places. And now they made this like easy transition. But if you've ever worked at a company where you are in the minority of people who work remotely, unless you were just a totally like individual contributor, like you are the one, front end developer, somebody just like says, fix this, and you don't have to talk to any other humans or whatever, it is a definitively degraded experience when you never want to be the person on the pod in a conference room when everybody else is in person. You know, I think FaceTime will still be a thing. And even if it isn't, frankly, I don't think you want to necessarily be the person who is out of New York City, even if the company has no office, when the majority of people are in New York City, because they could still play on the company softball team, go out to happy hour after work, connect to the community and all of that sort of stuff. You know, look, there's a lot of space in Idaho, but like there's a value to like, okay, when you log off of the Zoom, how do you connect to your, you know, kind of peer community? There will be a lot of people who are much more productive away from work, but I think a year or two from now, most of these companies are going to be max 20% remote. And so
around those edges, like you think, like those roles that.
Yeah, like look at, like a lot of people have realized, actually, I hate other people and I don't want, and they're thriving. I mean, you talk to people who have kids, right? And they've got like one kid who's thriving and one kid who's really suffering because social interaction and in person is like really their thing. And I think more people are kind of social animals. That doesn't necessarily mean the office setup that we had is the most productive setup, but I still believe in a sort of critical mass locality kind of thing, right?
Heather, I know, jump in, Heather, because I know you guys literally just got this program done virtually. Well, I was a part of it. It was very, very communal. Yeah.
I mean, to your credit, Andrew was phenomenal as a co-pilot to these founders, all virtual. I mean, we were really, really surprised at how well it did work to go completely virtual. And we ended up making 3 investments in founders that we had never met in person, but we got to know so well over the course of 100 days, which is pretty amazing. But you know, just talking to what you're talking about, Charlie, I think the danger here is the hybrid model. It's like when everybody's all remote, you figure it out. When you're all in person, there's something there. But I do think that in general, you're going to think about activity and work differently. And maybe there's spaces and times where you come together for community-based work or activity, like workshopping, things like that. And then there's, you know, execution times, there's collaboration and execution. What I would love to see is some more frameworks for how you do work together as a team and what is in person or not. Because even if you're all in the same city, people are now rethinking about having their kids go to school the whole day. Should they be home? Should they do that? You know, so I do think new work environments are going to be a thing, and then activity-based work. And, you know, OKRs are due for a little bit of a revamp here. Like how are you doing output-based monitoring as a company? And there'll be all these technologies and tools that do that so that you kind of have this seamless thing when you're in person or not. So I don't want to get rid of the serendipity by any means. I mean, most of human was built off of in-person, you know, networking and community building. There are a couple platforms, like I've been really impressed with Upstream. If you've tried Upstream, they do these networking events that seem much more organic. It's 5 minutes, you're meeting people. It's not fully work and it's not professional. And, you know, it'd be great for day one to do a Upstream so you guys all meet each other serendipitously.
Yeah.
You know, we know that Zoom happy hours do not work. Like they just all went away and nobody wants to talk about them anymore because they were so painful. So who's going to build the technology to be able to have some sort of a social interaction that's not Brady Bunch, as you put it, or you know, or in person? Because if you do have half the team remote, you're still going to need to do that post-COVID.
Charlie, you've done so many like events. I'll tell you, my first interaction with you was coming to one of your Not a Pitch events. I pitched day one, I got a customer. It was an amazing experience. And I thought, and it kind of worked, right? And there was a little bit of camaraderie to a lot of what Heather and what we engendered at Human. How's it been like going from your like community building to virtually? And well, also like, I'm really curious as to like, how's it been, but also like, what's the point of that strategy, right? Out of all the investors I've ever met, you're out there building community like no one else. Like what's the rationale behind that? And how are you seeing that work in this kind of new environment?
So one of the things that I believe in is that out of the next 50 most important companies to be built in New York, 45 of them are going to be built by people who aren't on anybody's radar today, right? Like, yeah, sure, the founders of, you know, Flatiron Health or whatever, like if they go on to do another thing, like, you know, obviously you want to back them again for their third time around. But I mean, clearly they don't need a seed round, outsiders for a seed round now. But like most of those people are like, there's an iPhone developer at Flatiron now who, you know, who's been coding for like 5 years, and that person doesn't go to the board meetings and has maybe not met the founders for more than like 10 minutes on a, you know, the end of an interview or something like that, right? That, how do I become accessible to that person? And that's the sort of what I'm trying to do with the fund. Now, I'm a solo GP, so there's only one of me making investment decisions, and so I don't really scale. But what I do think is very possible, and what we have scaled, is the in-between actually knowing a VC and just following them on Twitter, right? Like there are many other VCs where like if you follow them, or you've already been backed by them and then they're in your inner circle, it's very hard to partially get to know Mark Andreessen, right? Like, and there's no, you know, middle ground there. We've tried to scale that so that, you know, somebody could interact with me by like coming to this event. I generally show up anywhere anybody invites me. And we have done these dinners in the past, you know, once or twice a month where we go neighborhood by neighborhood, we split the cost of a chef, and, you know, it's 10, 12 people at a time. And the half-life of a dinner interaction is really long. Like all of the I mean, I've probably had dinner with like 1,000 people, and I can remember a lot about those people because we sat down for dinner. It's you know, kind of pretty meaningful. But that doesn't mean I have an open calendar, right? But one-on-one meetings, I think, the bar is pretty high because they're costly from a time and investment perspective. Like if I sit down with you one-on-one, I got to really feel like I could be helpful and there's a good shot of me doing this deal or whatever. But there's like 6 different other things that we could sort of, you know, interact with. And then those not a pitch events, I don't care if you came up with the idea today and you could just swing by and just give me the quick 30 seconds. Hey, have you ever thought of this idea, right? That is basically what that stage of founder should get in terms of VC interaction, right? You give me a minute, I'll give you a minute back. It's not a big investment on either one of our time. You're just at the beginning stages of this. If I can just give you something directional that is helpful, I think that's great. What we've seen in the shift to virtual is some of the stuff we had already started. So along the lines of accessibility, we realized that like, if all we do are after work events, no one who has a kid will ever be able to show up, right? So we started doing the Nana pitches actually before this time, and we were doing every other month. So we would do like a month virtual for lunchtime and then a month like in person. Mm-hmm. And we realized we got a different mix of people, and that was helpful. You know, we started doing more daytime and lunchtime stuff. We did our dinners, and we were doing virtual dinners. The first dinner we did, which was like March 20th, was like miserable. It was the worst experience ever because half the people were in like a quarantine space, like on the way to go see their elderly parents. No one knew like how they were going to get food. They were staying up until midnight to try and get a fresh direct slot. It was the most stressful, most aggravating thing ever. You could see week over, and we started doing them weekly, things start to normalize and people start to accept it. And then actually in June, as the world started to open up and outdoor dining started to become a thing and the weather started getting better, people lost interest. And so 2 out of the last 4 we canceled, and then we just stopped doing them entirely. So I think you always got to be sort of flexible with.
There's a lesson in there of being pretty nimble, like and dropping something that's about to sort of, like you said, like seeing the end and recognizing we're probably shifting pretty fast these days.
And being willing to fail too. Like, well, I'll throw, any of you guys have an idea for an event? I'll throw it up next week. And it's just a bunch of people in a Zoom. We'll talk about a topic, and like, we don't need name tag. Obviously we don't need name tags now, but like, it doesn't have to be the most, you get good people in a room talking, that's useful. And I've always tried to do that. And that's how we scale.
Heather, you had a thought there?
Well, I was gonna say, it's so funny. I used to just go out after work all the time for social stuff because I loved being out of the office at that time. And now Zoom at night is like the last thing I want to do because I'm done with it. So, my routine is completely differentiated now. So breakfast Zooms are even better now than the happy hour replace that. There's some of these questions, Andrew, like one person said, what if technology just falls short of replacing genuine human interaction? Like, I think it does. It definitely does. And I don't expect it to ever replace human interaction, and nor should it. I wish just figure out how it can facilitate it better, just as Charlie was saying, and how are there ways that you can kind of hack it? Like right now we're all looking at the screen and everybody has equal spots. And when you're talking, there's only one way audio channel. I mean, there's so much that can be done with tech that can make this better. Portal has done a good job. Facebook's Portal is a pretty good interaction in a room.
Interesting.
Where it follows you and it gives you some depth perception, and that's probably the closest to a like real human interaction I've seen so far.
I like that. Well, I feel like there's this two-edged thing, right? Like when we've all experienced it, which is as soon as everyone got off planes and sat in front of their computer, everyone was available, right? And there's that, like, there's all these little silver linings, but there's all these things we just traded off. I feel like the big reckoning around inclusion, diversity, race that's happening right now, that's been a long growing thing, but we're, facing up to it, it seems. How do you guys see, like, where do some of these changes fit into us making the right kinds of moves, right? Like, or as the ecosystem changes, as the world changes, how can we get on the right side of some of these issues? How can we fix some of these wrongs? And where do some of these, like to your point, Charlie, like if we can hold Zooms at the right time, that's inclusive in a little way. Like, what are some of the other things that are happening that you guys have seen that are working, that need to be worked on? Where do you sort of see the ball going on kind of making VC and entrepreneurship much more inclusive? Danika, you have a thought?
I do have a thought. I mean, I'll go back to like one of the nice things about the camp program, which is different from the way our fund works normally, I think a little bit different, is it's just open to applications. Anybody can submit an application and I get paid to look at all of them. So where I'm going to look at every single one and review it and send feedback. I mean, not long feedback, not detailed feedback, but at least a couple sentences to every single application. And that's a small way, I think, that we, the onus is still on us to make sure that we can broadcast that really far and wide. Because if you don't know who we are and you don't know that I have an application open, doesn't really help. But the hope is that maybe starts to help people get over the hurdle of like, I'm not already networked. I haven't, been invested in before. I don't know how to come to your event and say hi. So that's, one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is like, how do we do more of that and make sure that we can help, like I said earlier, more diverse founders from more places who are solving problems that they see in their lives. And at least for me right now, is that helping fix the internet? Then I would really like to hear about that, because I'm sure I have not articulated all the problems with the internet fully, to be able to solve them.
Yeah, those are big, lofty things you said, Andrew. I mean, we can all do some small things in there, but, I like this one question: what are the strongest values you see in pre-seed companies and founders? And I think one big thing we can do as early stage investors are thinking about the heuristics that we look for in a really thoughtful way. And how are you uncovering talent that is, we say that we like to find talent 6 months ahead of the market. And so if we're doing the hard work of saying, what do we really actually think is good? What does good look like? What does a good founder? What does a good human look like? Who do we think is going to win? that's harder than saying, oh, I'm looking at the resume and I have social cues. They went to Stanford or they went to HBS or whatever. Those are lazy social cues in my opinion. And as the value of your credentials go down, the value of the intangible skills that you do not have on your resume. So one of our areas of future of work is beyond the resume. It's redefining that pattern recognition. And, you know, so we're a long way to do that because you really have to understand what's good and what you're able to see. But also you have to find nodes within other communities that understand those heuristics and can pinpoint that. Because if you do the work to have the nodes in other communities and you trust those people to find good, you all of a sudden have a very broad network that can be your reference point that's not your buddy from, you know, from college. So I do think that being bold and figuring out, so some of these attributes, risk tolerance, distance traveled, you know, what have you built before? Do you know how to like test and iterate? Do you have self-awareness of what you're really bad at and what you're really good at? Do you have the ability to hire people? Do you have the ability to, you know, to prove and map those skills, I think, to a funding or to a building environment are important.
I'm gonna like throw a comment because it's like, I think there's so much to be done, and like you guys, well, here's a premise. At the earliest stage is when we have the best ability to kind of reset some of these trajectories, right? When, like you just said, Heather, you're investing in people for their potential versus like how far do they sort of follow the well-trodden path, right? And if you haven't trodden the path before, how are you going to know where to go, right? But if you're if you're investing, if you're supporting, if you're working at the very beginning, you know, it's just like so much more free reign to look past all those things, right? So I just love what you guys are doing, like reaching further upstream, right? And getting folks when they're nascent. Heather, I mean, Humans in the Wild's application was the first time human had ever done an application. So sort of to Danika's kind of comment, how has that impacted humans' ability to sort of like reach far and wide?
Yeah, you know, we used to say that like talent doesn't work on our time frame. So I didn't like to have these applications in the start and all this sort of stuff. And then I just realized there are so many incredible founders out there. So we saw 890 people who wanted to build with Human in 2019. So we're like, how do we increase the velocity of being able to see people? And so applications and cohorts and camps, like it makes sense. And to be a part of that does a lot for founders. And so, you know, I just hope we can scale it and do even more in that way. But I think applications are a big one. It also allows the founders to really articulate their thoughts and articulate what they want to build. And I think that exercise in and of itself is super valuable.
One other thing that I think is also important considerations for venture and accessibility in general is that a lot of times we mistake open for diverse. And you know, just because you've removed all the barriers, you think about the channels that you're connected to, right? So, you know, I think about like in June when Jason Lemkin announced that he was only taking pitches from Black founders, or he would try, you know, and I don't know what that means, but creates a whole lot of other questions, like what is he doing every other month and all of that sort of stuff, right? But he tweeted it, and I have learned a lot over the past couple of years in thinking about diversifying my network. How many Black founders and influencers and people in the tech community does he follow? Which is probably a direct correlation to how many follow him. And so if your whole network and Twitter graph is all white, then tweeting that you're open to meeting with Black founders is not that helpful, frankly. Like, because you actually have to do the work to diversify your network and community before you put these kinds of offers out. And I've talked to a lot of people about the signaling that comes from association with people, and you know, how we share things and by who, and what it means to be, you know, from underrepresented groups, and for other people to signal like, hey, this thing is cool, for people that look like me, and you know, it's okay, and you get that signal boost from certain people, and it's not scalable. It's a lot of one-on-one relationships, right? It's a lot of, you know, somebody like building trust with one particular person who can vouch for you and broaden your network and all of that sort of stuff. And that's, I think it's a time investment that's has to be done intentionally.
So right, so good.
Yeah, you want to
Great.
take another question from the field here, or I'll just do it. So someone asked, Anna asked, what recommendations do you have for someone who wants to get into the VC studio space but does not have entrepreneurial experience?
To start a studio or to get into one as a...
To get into one, to work
Okay.
for one. At least that's how this question occurs to me.
Day one is a phenomenal way to start that. Like a tee up here. I mean, you know, Andrew spun out to do day one because there was a clear opportunity for this. It's like now there are so many founders who we are looking at to bring into studios, and then, but sometimes it's not right to do it yet. Like, build with others first, bounce your ideas off of your peers, figure out what it is that you want to build. Have that direction, and I think that's a great on-ramp. I love what day one is. So
thank you. Thank you, Heather. Honestly, tiny little thing I think about a lot of, like Charlie's not a pitch sessions, that idea of like there's a right amount of advice to help a founder just get that next step. And that's a lot of what day one's about, is taking next steps and having the right people and stuff around you so that you just aren't stuck and you can keep making those steps, because there's every resource available, but you just need to kind of put it all together and get started and get going, right? So yeah, absolutely. The side hustle, the project, the whatever it might be.
I'll mention day one, and I think, Andrew, I gave you this similar feedback. I don't think there's anything about what you're doing that somebody couldn't replicate on their own for free. That sounds like a bash, but it's not, because you have to ask yourself the question, are you going to do that? And the reality for most people is no. Like, could you individually reach out on Twitter and all these social networks and go like find all of these interesting people and like connect with them and you know, form these little groups and you know, is the content out there? Sure, there's a shit ton of content out there, right? But in many ways, it's like grad school, only much less expensive. Is it like what you're paying for is the curation, the accountability, the fact that it's like all in one, you know, place. I think there's a lot of things that founders don't like the idea of paying for that is kind of very short-sighted, right? They're willing to spend their life savings and friends and family money on $250,000 worth of a development shop, but yet not willing to spend a couple grand here and there, like researching, connecting, joining, like all of this sort of stuff that could make that $250,000 spend so much more effective. People are like, oh, I don't know, $1,000, that's a lot, you know? It's like, well, you're thinking about quitting your job. That's the most expensive thing, right? So I think the way that founders think about what they spend on is kind of all screwed up.
Yeah, I'll add to that really quickly. I agree with that. I think that one of the reasons I love day one and also what we're creating is I think there's the mentality that as a founder, you get into these ecosystems like a studio or an accelerator, and then it unlocks the resources when you could be beginning to develop that network yourself and focused on testing your idea, figuring out if there's a customer for what you're trying to create, and all the things you have to do once you're actually in. So yes, you could do all of those things on your own, but I think it's kind of the dogma of the day that what you need to do first is to get into one of these places, and then all the resources unfold for you. So I think anything we can do to make those resources more cost effective for founders and more available and accessible is going to be just a positive for entrepreneurship.
Here's a question that I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't get to, which is like the state of the funding landscape. And like Heather, you mentioned at the very beginning, you said, seed keeps moving this way, right? It keeps moving away from the beginning, creating more and more space for whatever you call it, pre-seed, early stage. And all these new forms of funding pop up, whether they're different accelerator stages, whether they're different early stage funds, whether it's like hustle fund doing ridiculously early checks, like whatever they call it. How are you guys seeing sort of the state of this early stage and what pre-seed has become? Like, and maybe one way to ask it is not just like what's happening, but also what are you guys looking for as you're either accepting someone into your program or writing that first check? Like, what can people sort of look to as sort of these first mile markers? And, I know that sort of sets a paradigm because before that, they have to do a lot of stuff with money, different things happen. But yeah, where do you guys see these like new milestones coming in, and where do you guys play? Where do you guys see those shaking out as? I love it. Everyone
Danika,
at once.
we haven't heard from you. Well, Danika, maybe, you go
I
first.
can talk about it. Yeah. So at the very earliest stages, particularly through camp, because we're going to spend a ton of time with you.
Yeah.
And so that in and of itself helps us understand, what kind of founder you are and what kind of risk we're taking. But primarily we're looking for to invest in people who can build the thing that they're talking about. So it's a little hard for us to get behind just the idea. We need to demonstrate even the founder who can sort of hack it together is fine, but like that you've tested out your idea a little bit, and that you have a unique insight about the problem that you're solving or the market that you're addressing. And you've found kind of an interesting way to go after that. So that's frankly a pretty low bar, I think. For camp, we don't have to, the product doesn't have to be in market. You don't need to have users and revenue and all of those signs of traction. I think at the seed stage that has gotten harder and harder. Because Series A has gotten that much further away. But for our sort of pre-seed program, it's like a demonstration of, the ability to build something, put something out there, test it, get feedback, adapt. So I think that flexibility, ability to understand and get feedback is really important.
I love that. We said that too. You remember in school when your teacher would give you points for showing your work? It was like, you got the wrong answer, but you show your work. It's a lot of that too. It's like, how does the founder test, iterate, learn, take that feedback? What are the cycles, and are they shortening those cycles of testing and iterating? And so we always say collide with the market as soon as you possibly can, because you will learn things from your customer. And so there was this notion of like, we're building in stealth mode and all this sort of stuff. It's like, no, get it out there and figure out what the customers are saying, because the worst thing possible is build it because you think they're going to come and you spend all this time building, and then it's a completely different thing. So I'd much rather have a hacked together tech version of something that's actually working and you're starting to see, and then also making sure that your metrics are not vanity metrics. So even if it's a small number of people who are using and paying, are you thinking about how you're keeping it sticky? Even if it's 20 people, is it sticky for those 20 people versus, I had 10,000 page views on this, message, or, I also think that the advertising landscape is just really messed up right now. So it doesn't do a lot to show customer acquisition costs and things like that. You really have to figure out how to like elbow grease that. And it's hard to do that from a pitch deck. So it is building that relationship. To Charlie's point, how do you build that relationship and show people your iteration cycles? And we do have a metrics playbook that we'll probably make published, because I think there's just a lot more granularity between concept and seed now. Like it's a level of granularity, and guess what? Most Silicon Valley investors are not comfortable in that space. So that is an opportunity area if you can really understand how to articulate that to people. And I'll say one thing about like this friends and family round. I came from the Midwest. I did not come from a venture background. Like I was like, I didn't have friends and family who could put in $1 million. Like that's a crazy notion for most people. But what I do love, we've changed it to friends and founder round. And I think in New York specifically and other areas, founders are starting to angel invest small amounts. And that's a huge signal for investors if good founders have put in even a small amount, because that small check will go a long way because they know how to build. So really start to go out. Don't underestimate successful founders who might build or might be able to put in a small check. And there's a fund. Charlie, I think you're part of the fund too, aren't you? Or an advisor?
Co-invested with the fund. Yeah.
There are a couple of now co-investment.
Enough management fees to invest in the fund.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting founders in, you're around.
Hey, I'm super cognizant. We're 2 minutes from 6 o'clock. So I'm just going to get one more question in. It's going to go fast. Here we go. Charlie, last question's for you. You have this cool thing called feedback.vc. What are the most common feedbacks that founders are getting? Aggregate it all, anonymize it. What do people usually get told when they're building, if you have a sort of snippet for us?
Yeah, so Feedback VC is a blind panel of real investors and a report based on their feedback. So basically, like, they fill out a whole bunch of things about like team and market and economics and all of this sort of stuff, but it's anonymous. So they know that like you're a team of former consumer marketers, but they don't know whether you are male, female, black, white, any of the above, and we take all of that kind of out. What we're seeing is a few things. One is it's so easy for founders to get caught up in the description of the product and the particular ways in which it's like different than other things. VCs on the platform can opt in to an introduction to one of our companies, and we matched what drivers made people want to opt in. It had nothing to do with the ratings they got on the actual product. The most was the area and the problem you picked to work on, right? So there are some VCs that are like, yeah, I'm not doing fashion. I'm out. I'm not doing ad tech. I'm out. But like, oh, you're doing AI and the HR. You know, they don't even read what it is that you're doing. Maybe they pay a little of attention to like, what kind of oh, you're a data scientist doing something in that space. That's cool. I want to meet with you. Now, it's not necessarily predictive of like, do you get the investment? But like, you obviously can't get the investment unless you get the meeting. So like, picking your problem area and just making sure that you have like the space to run. There's the other thing was the economics. And what I mean by that is anyone that's ever pitched me a like fashion recommendation thing based on affiliate fees, it's like, what are the chances that anyone's going to take the recommendations? What are the pennies on the dollar in affiliate fees you're going to make? Like, by the time you work through that conversion funnel, there's just no money in that space.
So even at the early stage, it's like, where are the dollars and is there a real problem?
Right? Yeah, is this going to be like a fire hose of revenue that a halfway decent team could drink from, right? That you don't even need to be the world's greatest team, that like, anybody could collect revenues from this. Those are the two biggest factors.
So good. Well, I'm glad we got to glean it because I know you have that sort of wealth of awesome sort of data flowing through. Guys, it's 6:01. Thank you so much, Charlie, Danika, Heather. This was the best chat in public I've had all week. And you guys are just really great people. Thank you for joining.
I appreciate the promptness. You are fun.
I got to get Danika back to her boat. It's going to be fun. She's on the lake. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you for your questions. Sorry we didn't get to nearly all of them, but they were very appreciated. And yes, everyone, we'll let you go. Have a great Wednesday evening. And
thanks for everyone joining.
No problem.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Nice.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.